somewhere along the way, you stopped expecting life to be gentle with you, not in a dramatic, cinematic way. Not in the kind of way people applaud, but quietly like a door inside you closed one evening and never quite opened the same again. And if you're honest, there's a part of you that wonders whether everything you carried, the chaos, the confusion, the moments where you had to be strong before you even knew what strength meant, whether all of that did something to you, not just damage, something else, because you don't move through the world the way other people do. You notice things they don't, you understand things they struggle to even name, and sometimes it feels less like a gift and more like a weight you never asked for. But here's the uncomfortable truth most people won't say out loud. When you endure too much, your mind adapts in ways that look a lot like intelligence, but feel a lot like survival. And the line between the two becomes so blurred, you don't even know where one ends and the other begins. You learned early that emotions weren't always safe, that silence could mean tension, that tone mattered more than words, that sometimes what wasn't said was louder than anything that was, so you started paying attention. Not consciously at first. It wasn't a decision. It was instinct. The kind of instinct that forms when your environment teaches you that missing a signal could cost you something: peace, safety, belonging, or even love. And slowly, without realizing it, you built something inside yourself, a kind of awareness that most people never have to develop. You began reading people the way others read simple instructions. You could feel the shift in a room before anything actually happened. You could tell when someone was upset, even when they were smiling. You could sense distance before it became absence. And people might call that emotional intelligence, but what they don't see is where it came from, because this kind of awareness isn't always born from curiosity. Sometimes it's born from necessity, from growing up in spaces where you had to predict moods to stay safe, where you had to become smaller, quieter, more adaptable, where your nervous system learned to stay alert, even when nothing was technically wrong. This is what psychologists sometimes describe as hypervigilance, but that word doesn't really capture it. It's not just being alert, it's being wired to anticipate, to scan, to calculate emotional risk in real time. It's like living with an internal radar that never turns off, and while it makes you incredibly perceptive, it also means you rarely get to fully rest. Because even in calm moments, a part of you is still watching, still listening, still preparing, and over time, this does something subtle but powerful to the way you think. You don't take things at face value anymore. You look beneath them. When someone says, "I'm fine," you don't hear the words. You analyze the hesitation, the tone, the micro-expression that flickered for half a second before disappearing. When people make decisions impulsively, you hesitate. Not because you're indecisive, but because your mind has already run through 10 different outcomes before anyone else has even noticed there's a choice to make. You became someone who sees patterns, because your survival once depended on it. And this is where it starts to feel confusing, because from the outside, it looks like intelligence. You seem thoughtful, observant, deep, but from the inside it often feels like overthinking. Like you can't just exist in a moment without dissecting it. Like your brain doesn't know how to simply let things be, and that's because it was never trained to. It was trained to solve, to prepare, to prevent, to make sure you never got caught off guard again. And maybe the hardest part is this: people admire this about you without understanding what it cost. They come to you for advice because you get it, because you can hold complex emotions without panicking, because you don't flinch when conversations get heavy, but they don't see the part of you that learned how to sit in discomfort, because you didn't have a choice. You didn't develop depth because it was interesting. You developed it because you had to. There's a kind of intelligence that comes from studying books. And then there's a kind that comes from studying people, from studying pain, from studying unpredictability. You learned how to navigate emotional landscapes the way others learn basic routines. You became fluent in things most people avoid. Grief, tension, uncertainty, and especially ambiguity, that feeling of not knowing what's going to happen next. For most people, ambiguity is uncomfortable. They rush to resolve it, to label it, to simplify it into something manageable. But you've lived inside it for longer than you should have had to. You've been in situations where there was no clear answer, no guarantee, no sense of control, and you had to keep functioning anyway. That does something profound to the mind. It stretches your ability to hold multiple possibilities at once, to think in layers instead of absolutes, to tolerate not knowing without collapsing. And that's a form of intelligence that can't really be taught. It's forged slowly, uncomfortably, over time, but there's another side to this that people don't talk about enough. Because when you get used to uncertainty, you also get used to bracing for impact, even when things are going well. Even when there's no immediate threat, a part of you is still waiting, still expecting something to shift, still preparing for the moment things fall apart again. It's like your mind built a house in a storm, and even after the storm passed, you kept reinforcing the walls. Just in case. And this is where the exhaustion comes in. Not physical exhaustion, emotional, cognitive. The kind that builds quietly over years. Because being this aware, this perceptive, this prepared, requires energy. Constant energy. You're not just living your life. You're analyzing it, interpreting it, adjusting to it in real time. And sometimes it makes even simple interactions feel heavy. Small talk feels unbearable. Surface-level conversations feel hollow. Not because you're difficult, but because you've seen too much to pretend things are always simple. You've experienced emotional depth, whether you wanted to or not. And once you've been there, it's hard to go back. This is why you might feel disconnected in certain spaces, like you're out of sync with people who haven't had to think this deeply or feel this much. It's not that you're better than them. It's that your mind was shaped by different conditions. And those conditions forced you to grow in directions that aren't always visible, but are always present. There's also something else that happens when you endure too much. You develop a complicated relationship with your own emotions. Because at some point you had to manage feelings that were too big for you at the time. Maybe you suppressed them. Maybe you intellectualized them. Maybe you learned to stay functional even when you were falling apart internally. And over time, this creates a kind of emotional layering. You don't just feel things. You observe yourself feeling them. You analyze why they're happening. You trace them back to their origin, and while this creates a deep sense of self-awareness, it can also create distance. Because you're not just inside your emotions, you're studying them, and sometimes that makes it hard to simply experience them without trying to understand them first. It's like your mind became both the person feeling the pain and the person trying to solve it at the same time. And that dual awareness, that split attention, is another form of intelligence that often goes unnoticed. Because from the outside, it just looks like you're calm or composed, but inside there's a constant dialogue happening, a constant processing, a constant attempt to make sense of things that never fully made sense in the first place. And maybe the most overlooked part of all of this is how early it started, because this didn't begin when you became an adult. It began when you were still figuring out who you were, when your brain was still developing, when your understanding of the world was still forming. And instead of learning that the world was stable and predictable, you learned that it could shift without warning, that people could change, that safety wasn't always guaranteed, that love could feel uncertain, and your mind adapted accordingly. It became sharper, more observant, more strategic, but also more cautious, more guarded, more aware of what could go wrong. And that awareness, while incredibly powerful, can also make it difficult to feel at ease. Because when you've spent so long anticipating problems, peace can feel unfamiliar, even suspicious, like you're waiting for something to interrupt it, like you don't fully trust it yet. And that's where things start to get complicated, because the very traits that make you insightful also make it harder to relax. The very awareness that helps you navigate life also makes it harder to switch off. And the intelligence you developed through survival sometimes keeps you in survival mode even when you don't need to be anymore. And maybe that's the part no one prepared you for. Not just what you would gain from enduring so much, but what would stay with you afterward. But what would stay with you afterward, the part where you don't just walk away from what hurt you. You carry its echoes into places that were supposed to feel safe. You notice it in the way you hesitate before trusting something good, in how your mind searches for cracks, even in moments that are whole, in the quiet instinct to prepare an exit before anything has even gone wrong. This is the consequence no one explains clearly enough. When survival becomes your baseline, peace can feel like unfamiliar territory. Not because you don't want it, but because your system doesn't quite know how to hold it yet. And so you stay alert, even when you're loved, even when things are stable, even when, logically, you know you're okay. There's a part of you still listening for the storm. But here's where something important begins to shift. What if the intelligence you built, the awareness, the depth, the ability to see what others miss, was never the problem? What if the problem is that no one taught you when to put it down, because you were never meant to live in constant analysis? You were meant to use it and then rest, and maybe healing doesn't mean becoming someone new. Maybe it means learning that you don't have to scan every room anymore, that not every silence hides danger, that not every calm moment is a setup for collapse. It's slow, this kind of relearning. It doesn't happen in one realization. It happens in small, almost invisible moments when you choose not to overanalyze a message. When you let a conversation end without dissecting it later. When you allow something good to exist without questioning how long it will last. At first, it feels unnatural, almost wrong, but over time, something soft begins to return. Not the version of you from before everything happened, but a quieter, steadier version that knows both depth and peace. And that's the part worth holding on to, because you didn't just become someone who survives, you became someone who understands. And now you get to decide how much of that understanding you carry into your future, and how much you finally set down. If this felt familiar, if some part of you recognized yourself in these words, then what you went through mattered, and so does what comes next. And if this story resonated with you, you are not alone. There are more like you than you think, quietly learning how to feel safe again, one moment at a time,